Very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining Louise Swan and I for our English parent workshop. We like to do these on all the different subjects. You may well have come along to our verbal reasoning, our non-verbal reasoning, and the last one we did was mathematics. But the focus this afternoon is going to be on English comprehension. We're also going to talk about spelling, punctuation and grammar. And I'm delighted to have Louise Swan with me because Louise is certainly always the person I go to when I've got questions about English or anything I'm not quite sure about. She's certainly the one I go to, and I know is very passionate about the English word, certainly about building vocabulary with our students as well. So we're very lucky to have Louise with us. Good afternoon, Louise. Thanks for joining us.
Hi.
And we will share some slides with you as well this afternoon. So hopefully lots of you have received the booklet, the English Parent Workshop booklet. If you haven't been emailed that, just drop us an email to info@teachitright.com and we will send one across. But we certainly will show you all of that content on the slides anyway this afternoon. One of the things I did say at the beginning before we hit the record button was if you do have any questions that you would like to ask about English or really anything that is pressing or on your mind that you want to know about the 11 plus, please do take the opportunity this afternoon to ask. And I will, perhaps while Louise is talking, I will refer to those questions and we'll bring those questions into the workshop as we go along. We have got some activities that we would certainly love you to take part in as well. So we will we'll go through some different activities with you. So again, thank you very much for joining us. Please don't hesitate to unmute yourself and ask questions at different points during the workshop. As I say, certainly makes this workshop go a little bit quicker for you as well. Right, I'm going to share my screen with you now and we'll have a look at those slides. So guys, what we're going to talk to you about to start with really is what we want to get through this afternoon, what we're going to be covering off. We're going to be looking at the English section of the CEM and the GL Assessment 11 Plus exam. And we're going to talk to you about the skills that we feel our students need to do well in the English section and also share with you some examples of questions. We're also going to look at some very typical comprehension exercises as well with you, but also talk to you about what we feel the children need to work on in terms of their English skills throughout the course, really. And just to make you more aware, really, of the expectations within English in the 11 plus examinations. As many of you will know, the Reading Boys syllabus did change and did move away from CEM, and they added in English writing, which of course is a very, or they call it creative writing, is also a very big part of their exam system. But we certainly know with all of the students taking the 11 plus, whether that be Reading Boys, whether that's Kendrick, whether that's the Slough Consortium, or the schools in Buckinghamshire, or Birmingham as well. I don't know if we have got any of our parents from our Birmingham franchise here with us, but they also have a CEM syllabus, but it has just moved over to GL. But the thing that they have in common is that they all do a comprehension activity. Now, the comprehension activities that children have are in a multiple choice format. So the children will be given an extract. Now, we don't know whether that will be a fictional piece, whether that will be a non-fiction piece, even whether it will be a poem as well. So that is something that we know we've got to cover all the different genres, and we do that with our students. We make sure they've had exposure to non-fiction, fictional pieces, and Louise is always pleased about this, poetry as well. Children do need to have a really good core English knowledge, and children need to know things like literacy devices. They have to have a good knowledge of all of the different word groups. Children also need to be able to read at a good pace as well. And one of the things that we always talk about within our lessons is making sure that children, yes, comprehend what they're reading, but they can also read at a good speed. And we often talk about sort of words per minute as well that children would read. And we certainly look at sort of 100 to 150 words per minute in order for children to get through the extract to move on to the questions. You can imagine if a student is very slow with their reading and their pace is not quick enough, sometimes they will struggle to get to enough questions just because they haven't read fluently enough and quick enough. We also know, and the obvious thing to say about vocabulary is that children do need to have a good word knowledge. Some of the extracts, particularly if it's from a classical piece, sometimes the words can be quite difficult for them. So having a wide vocabulary and having exposure to some of those classical texts is really important. The types of questions that children will be asked will not be of a surprise to them. They can range from things like factual inference. It could well be that children are asked about questions that are related to the statistics within a text. That's certainly very much a non-fiction thing. But certainly inference is something that children do find more difficult, that kind of reading between the lines. But we know that there will be lots of questions around inference and deduction. They're not just going to be told, well, that's where the answer is, and you just extract it. So those inference skills are really, really important. The other thing that we're aware of is that with a lot of multiple choice style questions, sometimes children can kind of rule out the ones that they know are definitely not the right answer. So that process of elimination, which we've talked about a lot in our workshops, is something they can also apply as well, and just to limit their choices. We always advise with multiple choice tests, whether it be the English section or the non-verbal or the maths or the verbal reasoning, never to leave anything blank. So we'd always encourage children to put an answer down. That's really, really important. So hopefully you've got in your booklet, you've got those key bullet points there, but it was just to give you a bit of a summary around what the CM and GL assessment comprehension would entail. So just moving on to a pie chart, which we have shown you quite a bit over the last year or so. We know that with the English comprehension, in a CEM test, it represents about 10% of the 50%. So usually they would start with the English comprehension. That tends to be the first section that they will do. And just to put that into context, for CEM last year, it was a 15-minute section and they had 26 questions to do. Now, if you think about 15 minutes to read sort of 2 sides of A4, also to do 26 questions, children do need to work quite quickly to get through all of those. So again, that's why it's so important that children practice comprehension exercises and they get used to using their time well. And as we go through the course, we'll be moving very soon into block 5 and then sort of block 6 where we do a lot of exam practice, but block 5 will be more around time management. And we do think now it is time that children do start thinking about how long they're taking in their exercises, not only within the lessons, but also for their homework as well. So that's just a visual representation really of the breakdown of the different subject areas for CEM. In terms of GL assessment, I'm sorry I haven't got a pie chart to show you, but 25% of the exam, 25% of the exam is represented by English. So within that, we've got English comprehension, and then we've got spelling, punctuation, and grammar sections. So again, a very big chunk of it is made up of English. Now, one of the things that I mentioned to you earlier was that children have to have a good knowledge of key words, and we often call these kind of literacy devices. And we can be pretty much guaranteed within any comprehension, they will be asked about these key words. And we thought we would put your knowledge to the test a little bit here and see if you know what some of these words mean. And I hope I'm not transporting you back to your school days too much, but maybe there are some words there that you can define for us and see if you know exactly what they mean. If you are looking at the booklet, we are on page 5 within your booklet, and we'd like you to try and match up for us the words down on the left with those definitions. They're all muddled up, and we'd like you to pair them up. We'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then we'll take you through what each of those words means in terms of how that could appear within an 11+ test. So give it a go. Hopefully you've got a bit of paper with you this afternoon and you can match them up. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to get rid of this box because it just sort of covers them up. They're all muddled up. If you haven't got the booklet to hand, hopefully you can read that and match them up. Okay, everyone, I hope that's enough time just to have a little bit of a go at that activity. So we'll go down through now and we'll just talk to you about what each of those words means in terms of definition. So alliteration, and it often comes certainly in poetry work as well. So an alliteration, you have a look down through the different definitions there. Hopefully you've spotted which one that one is. So an alliteration is obviously when a sound is repeated in a sentence. And again, we do associate that often. We have words like onomatopoeia and alliteration, personification that will often come up within a question within comprehension. So alliteration, hopefully children are familiar with. So I'm just going to admit someone else into the call. Homophones are also very popular within the 11 plus, and they can come in verbal reasoning, or they also could come into an English comprehension. And those are words that sound the same, but have a different spelling and different definition. So if we have a look down through, see where we've got that. Here we are. Words which sound the same, but mean different things. They are also spelt differently, like pair and pair. I think the other thing to be conscious of with homophones is those, an example like pair is obviously quite simple, but they do go on to things like principle and principle, or stationary and stationary. So they do get harder. There are harder homophones that we would expect children to learn. And if you do want a list of homophones, you can easily type that into Google, type in homophone list, and you will get a nice long list of homophones that children can learn and practice. And it could be a very simple oral activity, which you're just saying to a child, well, what does this word mean? What does this word mean? And obviously talk to them about the different spellings. But homophones certainly are very popular within the 11 plus. Similes. Now, hopefully we all know that similes use like and as, and often come alongside metaphors, and children can sometimes get those two a little bit mixed up. So it's important that they know the difference. So the definition here is descriptions that say something is like something else. The sun was like an orange balloon. We've put in adjectives, but of course we'd like to think most children know what adjectives mean, as in describing words, but all word groups are really important. So ones that's not listed there would be something like prepositions, for example. Do children know what prepositions are? I was obviously listening a little bit, Louise, today with you supporting one of your students after their lessons about passive and active voice as well. Not that it's something I would think really would come into the 11 plus, but is a good thing to know. Yes,
it could come into a question.
Yeah.
It may do. In the punctuation, they might give something in the passive and then put question mark, speech marks or something like that.
Yes, yeah. So it does. I mean, it has. I know it comes in the CGP GL books occasionally, doesn't it? So it could be potentially there, but. Onomatopoeia is the next one that we've got in there. And of course, with onomatopoeias, it's words like crash, bang, that describe a sound. Metaphors, hopefully we've matched that with the top one, a way of describing something by saying it is something else. The moon was a tennis ball is the example that they give there. Synonyms, words that mean the same. Not only is it relevant within a comprehension, but of course it would be relevant within the verbal reasoning section as well. Verbs, as in doing words or action words. Personification is when something is described by giving it human characteristics. So if I said the wind whistled, that would be an example of how personification could be used. And then we've got the last one, which is antonym, which I'm sure you've all married up with the opposite in meaning. So what we sometimes find, which can be a very useful activity, particularly if your child is in year 5, is that they can use a glossary of terms, and we can easily send you that. I know a lot of books have a good set of glossary of terms in the back that children can actually revise and go through. And it's certainly a very good thing just before their exams to go down through lots of key literacy devices and word groups and just make sure that they know the definitions. One of the reasons that it's very important is that something like abstract nouns may be something that children don't learn within their own schooling. And I know one year children were asked which of the words was an abstract noun, and they weren't too sure. So it's really important they cover all of those different ones. I know, Louise, you've got that wonderful poem, haven't you, that you like to teach children. Is this quite a good juncture to talk about that poem? I can bring it up if it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, I was taught this poem in my first year at grammar school. In my day, they didn't do an awful lot of grammar, and I didn't have a clue what different words were. And you can still find it now if you Google the first line, and the first line of it is, every name is called a noun, as field and fountain, street and town. If you substitute the as for like, it helps. So every name is called a noun, like field and fountain, street and town, and you can see that the nouns are in italics. In place of a noun, a pronoun stands, like he and she can clap their hands. Again, it's in italics. An adjective describes a thing like magic wand or bridal ring. A verb means action, something done, to read, to write, to jump, to run. It helps to explain to children, as we do, that verbs can be conjugated and put into different tenses as well. That how things are done, the adverbs tell, like quickly, slowly, badly, and well. The preposition shows relation, like in the street or at the station. Conjunctions join in many ways. They're sometimes nowadays called connectives. Sentences, words, or phrase and phrase. Again, those are the connectives or conjunctions. And then finally, the interjection cries out, hark, I need an exclamation mark. I can very clearly remember, even though it was a long time ago, that was my first English homework, to memorize it. And I've never, ever forgotten it. And it did come in very useful when I'd forgotten. I just ran through it in my head. And there they were.
Thanks, Lou. And I think, again, just anything that can help children remember things in terms of word groups, things like that, and a poem like that, I think is perfect, just to give them those reminders, which is, may well be something they could go back to in their mind in an exam situation as well. So thanks for that, Lou. Right. So we've obviously managed to pair up all of those keywords. The next thing we thought we would do is just really illustrate how keywords, like the ones that we've been looking at, can be incorporated into different comprehension questions. So Louise has got a couple of examples that she's just going to go through with you. They're fairly simple, really, but I think it just gives you a little bit of a flavour on how some of those keywords, if you didn't know what those words mean, you are going to find it really hard to actually access the questions. I've talked about this quite a bit through our workshops, and I mentioned something very similar when we were talking about maths keywords, things like mean, mode, median, that there's no glossary in the back that children can go and look up those keywords. They've got to know them. And the 11 plus does rely on quite a bit of prior knowledge. I think with some exams that children sit, you can they can get through them without having to know all the things beforehand. But I think with the 11 plus, it's very different. You do have to have a lot of prior knowledge before you go and sit the test. And particularly within the English section, I think that's even more imperative. Lou, some quick fire questions.
Yes, so this is a very common one, asking for the definition for a word. So obviously the children need to know the word definition. They won't say, what does this word mean? They will say, what's the best definition? Also, that little trick, the best definition, sometimes they will give one that's close and hope that the children, and they'll put that one early in the choices, hoping the children will go for the second best choice and miss the first best choice. In this one, it's a definition for the word malice. That word will probably have been in the text. So if they don't know the word malice, I was teaching them, instead of panic, going back to the text and see if the text gives you any clues. But you can see there are some nasty tricks in there. So, for example, a type of head lice, it's got lice in there. So a child who doesn't know what malice means might well go for that one. The answer, of course, we know is a desire to harm someone or something. But there's lots of tricks in there. So as much vocabulary as the children can learn and hope for the best that some of the words come up. We do give you a list of words that we suggest you learn, because we have raked through and found out words that come up repeatedly. So it's worth learning those words. And also we often recommend, don't we, Chris, the Cadwallader books?
Yes, yeah, fantastic.
Nice.
I mean, yeah, they are fantastic books for vocabulary, and it's one of the only books where they actually define the words underneath and give you a nice short definition. I think the other thing to mention when we talk about word building, and I know it's something that the tutors are very, very passionate about ensuring children use, are those word and meaning books. Because if children can record down words that they're unfamiliar with, then it becomes a very, very good revision aid as well. So when they get round to the summer, they can look through that book, work out the words they didn't know, and rehearse them. So you want somewhere where children are storing all the words that they've come across that they are unfamiliar with. And we do feel that word and meaning book is the perfect book. So if you do feel it's a book your child is not really using very regularly within their sort of homework, or using just at home to record down words that they come across maybe from their school reading books, I would really encourage you to get your child using that book. Vocabulary, yes, we know it appears within verbal reasoning, but it's also so relevant, of course, to the English comprehension section. And we know that children with a wide vocabulary are going to find this exam, a lot easier.
A nice tip when you're using the word and meaning book is to actually give your child the word and meaning book and get them to test you on the meaning, because they love that. They love being able to catch you out. It takes the pressure off them. But they're still engaging with the vocabulary. So that's a nice little tip, especially if you're using those boxes of words. And as I said, we would, in a question like this, where it's malice, ask them to go back to the text if they needed to. And see if the text gives them any clues. But the more words they know, the more time they can save by not having to go back to the text. But they're often, if it's a really tricky word, sometimes the examiners will give them a word that they expect them to know. But sometimes they'll give them a word to define that they don't expect them to know, but the meaning is very clear in the text. So that's another trick they use. So question 2, which word would fill the gap to make this sentence alliterate? And here's a perfect example. If you don't know what alliteration is, you're going to struggle a little bit. Alliteration, of course, is the repetition of a sound, so they would need to choose sipped. Number 3, what type of word is wildly? In this case, they've been quite kind, because children often say to me, oh, it's an adverb because it ends in ly. In this case, it is an adverb, but I always point out to them that adverbs don't always end in ly, and not all words that end in ly are an adverb. So they sometimes fall for that trick. An adverb, of course, describes a verb. So again, I would say to them, if you don't know, think about it. The wind blew wildly, then wildly is describing the blowing, therefore it's an adverb. But the children do need a lot of tuition in spotting what words are, a lot of practice in that area. Next one is, what type of word is against? Also, again, very difficult. Think about what the word is doing in a sentence. So, I was leaning against the door. In that little poem that we just showed you, it says a preposition shows relation, like in the street and at the station. So I would say a preposition shows how two things are related or connected. So there it is, preposition shows relation. So the sentence that you have in the question is, what type of word is against? So if I said, I am leaning against the door, the word against links I and the door. What's the connection between me and the door? It's the fact that I'm leaning against it. So there you go. You combine the poem and a sentence and you get the meaning of against, that it's a preposition. They can, of course, we've talked about using elimination. It's clearly not a verb. It's clearly not an adjective, and it's clearly not a noun. So by doing that, it eliminates and brings them to preposition. Finally, in what tense is the word refused? This is a nice, easy one because it's got an ed ending, and most children, we hope, by the time they've left us, know that a past tense often ends in ed. But again, they could be mean in the exam and give the children a irregular verb that's not ending in ed. So they have to watch out for that. So there's lots of nasty tricks that examiners use that we try to help them to be familiar with and aware of.
Lou, thank you very much. Just to reiterate really what I said at the beginning, that if there are any questions as we go through this afternoon that you would like answered, or anything about English, or really just anything that you really want to bring up and you want to raise, then please do. The next thing that we are planning to move on to is to talk to you a little bit about the approaches to a comprehension exercise. And I think maybe to dispel a few myths around maybe some of the things that are done when we do a comprehension, that we would say, well, actually, no, that wouldn't really be the best approach. This is what we would recommend. And that may well vary from what students do in school, particularly when you're under time conditions. And when you are expected to do something at a reasonable pace, then the approaches can sometimes change. So that's what we're going to move on to now. We're going to talk to you a little bit about how to tackle a comprehension, what certainly is the best bit of advice around that. And we'll give you a sort of a 5-point plan as well. But it was just to remind you that if you do have any questions as we go along, just put them in the chat and we'll have a go at answering them. I'm just using a split screen at the moment, so I'm just going to move my slides across to you. So just bear with me while I share then the slides properly with you.
Perhaps while you're doing that, Chris, I can just talk a little bit about comprehension. Oh, you're ready. There you go.
Thanks, Lou. Yeah, we're sorry. I've just brought the slides across, but no, please do, Lou. But do talk to us about comprehension and how that
I really wanted to say that in my experience, the one hugest mistake that children make is thinking, I've got to read this text really quickly.
Yeah.
Yes, they have got to read it quickly, but if they read it so quickly that they don't give themselves time to listen to what the text is saying. So in other words, they decode the words, but they don't hear what the words are saying, then that quick reading is no good to them. The way I explain it to them is that when a little child is learning to read, let's say they were reading The Cat Sat on the Mat, a little child will go, the cat sat on the mat, and then they will give you a big smile and you say, that's wonderful, wonderful. Where is the cat sitting? And the child will just look at you and not have a clue because they've read the words but haven't listened. And I explain to the children that that principle lasts forever to all of us, whatever we're reading, that if we're so busy trying to decode the words or to read the words too quickly, we won't have time to think about what we're reading, and therefore we don't have the information. So I say to them, you are the speaker. Comprehension is difficult because you are the speaker. You are saying the words. You're not saying them out loud, but you are saying them to yourself. But you're not only the speaker, you're the listener. And you have to listen. And as well as listening, you've got to think about what you're reading, because that's where inference comes in. Inference requires you to think and come to a conclusion. If you're reading so quickly that you don't have time to think, you're not giving yourself a good chance at the inference questions. And then finally, you have to be not exactly the rememberer in the sense that you have to remember everything, but it does help if you can remember what section different information is. So if you can think, oh, that was near the beginning or the middle or the end, then you can therefore go and find what you need much more quickly than having to scan the whole text. So reminding them to be the speaker, the listener, the thinker, and to an extent, the rememberer, will help them to understand why they can't dash through that text.
Brilliant, Lou. Thank you. Just sort of on the back of that last point that you made there, Lou, in terms of kind of, you know, the remembering part. And I certainly know when we start doing comprehension with our students, and we often say to them, right, well, make sure maybe you pick out things that you believe maybe they might ask you about, or you think is quite memorable. The natural response, of course, is to highlight it all and start saying, yeah, this is all important. So it's actually about sort of training and teaching our pupils about, well, what are some of the things that you potentially might be asked about? So one of the things that is often discussed, and I hear this talked about a lot within our lessons, is about going to the questions before you start reading the passage. Unfortunately, within the 11 plus, because time is just not on your side, children really are far better to go straight into the reading process. If they do spend a lot of time looking at the kind of questions they've got, unfortunately, they will run out of time. I like it as an approach, but within the 11 plus, that really isn't necessarily going to help them. So what we would prefer is they go straight into the reading. They read the title. Louise always talks about how important that is. They read that title. Maybe they do a little bit of considering there, you know, what this could be about. Have I got any, maybe a little bit of prior knowledge on that particular topic? But I think going straight to the reading process is what we would certainly advise.
And Chris, sorry to interrupt, but while I remember, to read with interest and expression. Because even though they read expressively when they read out loud, they sometimes forget when they're reading them to themselves in their head to read with expression, because the expression gives you a much better understanding. And sometimes they look at something, and let's say it's on, I don't know, on the history of the balloon or something weird, and they think, oh, I'm not interested in this. If they're not interested, they won't listen to themselves. So exactly. Interest and expression.
Exactly that, Lou. And unfortunately, and obviously we don't know exactly what will come up in the exam, but they may well be presented with a title that, yes, doesn't really inspire them and is something they want to read about. Just to give you a bit of an example, 2 years ago in the CEM test, the title was Spring Clean. And it was actually a fictional story about a child in a house, basically cleaning, spring cleaning. And you know, for some children, that may not have inspired them very much. What they tend to be doing now, the exam boards, and I think they're getting a bit more savvy to this, is putting in a passage that potentially children would never have come across before. Really, the reason behind that is because they don't want the children coming out of the exam being able to recall exactly what that passage was. I think it's a bit of sort of confidentiality from their end, but this really makes it that what they will come across could be absolutely anything. I know dragons has been one of the topics that's come up before. But anyway, the point we're making here is that, you know, you want your child to have a wide breadth of reading skills, not just focusing on, you know, storybooks. They've got to be able to read that non-fiction as well. And Louise did her book club with her students today, and they were, you know, looking at non-fiction, which is so important. Anyway, let's get into just talking to you about the process. Louise has outlined it a little bit already, but first thing is then look at the title, read that, and then reading the text carefully, potentially picking out things that are important. And it's far easier, of course, when you're doing a non-fiction piece, because if you're looking at a page and you've got lots of statistics sort of littered down throughout the page, they're far easier to underline and pick out. But what we don't want children doing is losing that flow of reading. And if they do end up underlining everything, unfortunately, they're just going to really forget what they've actually been reading and not be able to sort of link and make it a cohesive piece of reading. The other thing that we advise children to do is also pause at various moments and actually try and internalize and think about what they've been reading. We do that as adults. You know, we read things. Sometimes we might even reread it again, particularly if it's a complex piece of writing. You know, I often find, certainly when I'm reading newspaper articles, I might read it and think, oh, I didn't quite grasp that. I'm going to need to reread that again. And children are the same, that if they do need to reread or pause at various stages, then we would advise them to do that. And as it says in point 3, maybe going back over the more complex paragraphs again. One of the things they do talk about at school is once children have read through an extract is to go back and potentially read it for a second time. This is something, again, which we would suggest that children don't do, that once they've read it thoroughly through once, and we do mean thoroughly, we're not talking about skimming and scanning. You know, if they skim and scan, they're going to miss things that are important. So it's reading it through word by word, is then they move straight on to the questions. Once then they're working through the questions, they can easily refer back to the text as often as they really want. What has changed over the years, and I've seen this because I see it within the books as well, paragraph 1 may not all relate to question 1. Paragraph 2 may not relate to question 2. So the important thing to emphasize there is, let's make sure our students read right the way to the end, because it may well be that question 1 relates to something near the end of the passage. So again, that importance of reading it all through thoroughly. The point that's made in 4 is looking at the questions. Certainly there will be key words within the questions that will help them relate back to the right place in the text. So again, maybe underlining it can be just something that will help them in terms of recalling where they need to go back to. There are often line references as well within the comprehensions. And these, again, we would encourage children to go back and look at. One of the reasons earlier on, sorry, you might be a little bit surprised why I did it. I wrote the word might on the screen. And it was because one of the questions I have seen before has related to where a word has dual meaning, and if a child doesn't go back to the text and look at what context that word was used in, they could well get that word wrong. So again, it's really important to just go back and refer to where that word appears within the context of that sentence. And particularly, and Louise I think mentioned this earlier, where it's a really challenging word that they just don't know, they may be able to decipher what that word means by the other words that are around it. So that, again, is why we'd really encourage them to go back to the right place within the passage.
I always say to the children, Chris, if I'm writing a comprehension, if I give a line reference, it's to help them.
Exactly, Lou. Yeah.
So
exactly
use it.
So use it, exactly. And they don't do it for every question, but like Lou said, they've probably given it to the children for a specific purpose. Now, that's 4 points. I mentioned earlier to you a 5-point plan. So I'm just going to go to another slide, which is near the end of your booklet, which is a sort of a 5-point plan, if you like. So read the title before starting to read the passage, very important. Point 2, read the passage carefully, underline keywords and phrases to help retain the key facts. Number 3, find the answers to all the questions using the passage to help you, backing up that evidence. And we often say that when we're in the lessons, that children need to prove how they know that's the right answer. Where is it in the passage that you found that answer? We'd encourage you to do that at home. When your child is working through comprehensions, get them to tell you exactly where they've got that evidence from, kind of backing up what they've put. Eliminating the wrong answers to limit your choices. And number 5, I do like this point, check like mad. So if they have got time left, particularly for those CEM students who have sort of 15 minutes, use all those 15 minutes. You know, if they finish after 10 minutes, those 5 minutes, they could reread the passage again or go back to harder questions. We see it so often, even within our mock tests, where children will sit back because they think they've finished all the questions and not utilize that time.
The tip I give them, Chris, for checking is, I always say to them, when you're doing a comprehension, do it with confidence, an attitude of, I know how to do this, I'm clever, I can answer these questions. But when you've finished, if you do have time to spare, change your attitude to, I've done lots of comprehensions and I've often got things wrong. So when I check it, I'm going to check and not look to congratulate myself about all the things I've got right, which is human nature, but to try and find something that I just might have got wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's so important. And we know, you know, children can change questions when they go back and have a look through it. And that could be 1 or 2 marks that they get, which could make all the difference. So it's so important that the double checking. We would emphasize that, of course, even in our mocks, to go back and double check, but we obviously want them doing that in the real thing. Lou, shall we move on to our first passage of this afternoon, which is all about the plane that doesn't go over the skies anymore, which is Concorde. And the reason we've chosen it is because it is certainly very statistical. I think certainly for a lot of our students, they would find this one quite interesting, actually. So, Lou, do you want to, I don't know if you want to read it or whether you just want to just go through the questions. What would you prefer?
I think we were going to read the second one, weren't we?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I think just showing everyone just what this non-fiction passage is about in terms of Concorde. And again, if you just sort of scan down through there on the screen, you could just see all these numbers.
Might be interesting for parents to actually read it and see for themselves, when you've only got one reading of something, how it feels to think, I've only got one reading of this, the pressure that it puts on you.
Yes. Shall we do that now? Just let you have a scan down through, parents, of that passage. It's quite short. Okay, everyone, hope that's given you hopefully enough time to go down through. What we have got after this is just a series of questions, or sort of typical questions that relate to this passage. And really what we wanted to highlight was, just how many of them can involve statistics and a bit of maths involved as well, particularly when you start dealing with dates and sort of a bit of subtraction, how easy it can be to fall into the traps of the question writers and maybe make a few errors. So these are the questions that sort of come after. When did commercial Concorde flights begin? And of course, if you go back here, we've got, despite being retired from the skies in 2003, after 27 years of commercial flights. So again, we've got to do a bit of subtraction there. So again, maths can really very much appear within comprehension questions. We've also got some questions that will relate to true statements, which again are very popular within comprehensions, where children have to work out which one must be true. I have seen, of course, where it does flip it on its head and put not true, but children end up choosing a true statement. So even within the actual question stem there, I might be encouraged to underline that part. Again, just so you know exactly what you're going to be focusing on.
I always encourage elimination there. I always encourage eliminate the ones that are not true.
Exactly, Lou. Yeah, exactly that. And then just again, we're just showing you, really highlighting to you how numbers can appear within a comprehension activity as well. Is there anything else you want to say about non-fiction, Lou, in terms of?
No, the only thing I would say is, although it's helpful to underline facts and figures, if you can, giving your children a little bit of experience in doing that would be good, because underlining is a skill that needs to be taught, and they often haven't been taught it at this point. So what they do is they go so crazy with the highlighter that they underline more than they don't underline. And they also get so involved in the underlining, they forget to listen to what the text, you're adding another feature while you're listening to what the text is saying, also underline. And that's really quite a sophisticated skill. So I would just be aware of that. And when they're doing comprehensions, just check the book that if it's a non-fiction, they aren't underlining too much. We do try and do that with them, of course we do, but there's a limit to how many times we can do it. So it's worth you looking out for that, I think.
I think also, Louis, I mean, it just from the point of view of where sometimes the text goes from an 11+ point of view in terms of challenging vocabulary. I mean, I was just looking through the text there and underlining spiraling, inefficient. I know we've got the word impressive feat there. And you can just see how certainly once you get to the 11+, how the text become, more wordy. And that's why it's so important when children are reading books at home or at school, they're reading books that also provide that sense of challenge to them. Because if they're not exposed to rich vocabulary books and they find the books, incredibly easy that they're always reading, their vocabulary will not expand. So one of the things we always talk to families about really is ensuring that your child, and I know Lou, you talk about sort of having a challenge book alongside a book that is maybe a little bit more fun in some ways, and actually how that's really important.
A lot of parents say to me, you're telling me that my child's got to read quickly, but they've also got to understand it. How do I get them to learn to read more quickly with that understanding? What I would say is I explain to the children, there are two types of reading. There is the reading that you do when you're reading what I would call a pleasure book. So we all do it. I have a nice easy book that I read in bed at night. I just want to know the story. That's all I want to know. And I read it quickly and I misread words. I miss out words. I put in words that aren't there, not consciously, but subconsciously, because I'm reading quickly to get the story. Now, children do a lot of that sort of reading, but that sort of reading doesn't serve you well in the 11+. You've got to read accurately, really accurately. So how do I teach a child to read accurately, but more quickly? The answer to that is choosing a trickier text than they would normally read, something that's not so challenging that it defeats them, but something that does challenge them in terms of vocabulary and the complexity of sentences, and get them to read it at the best pace they can, not quickly. So ironically, speedy reading comes from reading challenging texts slowly. And that's really hard to get your head around, but that is the way to do it. So finding a more challenging book and reading maybe 3 or 4 pages every other day or something like that, so that they practice that challenging reading and learn to read accurately. And if you listen to them read out loud, that's really a good indicator. You will notice whether they're reading accurately. And you will also notice from the expression they put in whether they're understanding. So it's a really helpful activity to do for your children to help them improve.
Brilliant, Lou. Thank you very much. I think we'll move away from non-fiction just for a little bit. And what we're going to move on to now is just to talk to you a little bit about inference skills. One of the reasons we wanted to focus on this within this workshop really was because we find certainly as teachers that actually this is probably one of the hardest skills to actually master in comprehension. Children having to have the ability to sort of read between the lines, connect up different elements of stories, and they do find that really challenging. So we've got a couple of activities which we'd like you to have a go at, which sort of illustrate factual points within a passage and also inference points. So let's just have a little look at an example here. So again, just to illustrate, this would be something we would do with the children, just to illustrate what we mean by inference. So we've got a sentence here. Walker received a funny email from his friend Lily. Which of the following sentences goes best with the statement? Walker will write back to Lily. Walker will buy something on the internet. Now, we know because Walker's received an email from his friend, and it's a friend after all, that we can use our inference skills to think that, well, Walker is going to write back. What we can't really infer is that Walker will buy something on the internet. Just because he's writing an email doesn't really link with that. So again, when we're reading something, there are various things that we can infer. So just to give you a very simple example, if we were reading about someone wearing a scarf or gloves or a hat, we could infer that it's probably cold outside, it possibly could be winter, and we use the skills that we've use the clues that we've read about to give us those clues to what's going on. And again, that's really what inference is all about. And the next two passages we feel illustrate this really well. So let's go down and have a little look at the first one. Now, this is all about pages within the United States Senate. And we'd like you to read that very short little paragraph. And then we'd like you to work out with the 4 statements that are underneath, which ones are factual and which ones are inference. This one, I think, is far more straightforward than the next one we'll look at, which always seems to generate quite a bit of debate. But have a go at this one, please. See if you can work out whether these statements are facts or whether they're inference statements. You can all see and read that on the screen. Someone has asked in the chat, very sensible question about reading lists. Yes, we do have recommended reading lists, and we have them for year 4, 5, and 6. They are on the student portal, but if you can't find them on the student portal, please do just pop us an email and we can send you back. We've got sort of free PDF documents which have a list of recommended books for those year groups. I don't think there's anything wrong with a year 4 child dipping into year 5 or a year 5 dipping into the year 6 list. I don't think it should be just solely for those different year groups. So you can mix it up. So just pop us an email and we'll send you through those recommended reading lists that we've generated. Okay, very short little paragraph there. So hopefully, guys, you've managed to work out what they are. I think just to get you involved a little bit and see that you're still with us. Someone asking for those in the chat. Yeah, I'll try and see if I can get those up. I should be able to get them on the shared area. So if I just go through, Lou, would you mind just running down through those 4 for me?
Yes, that's fine.
Is that all right? And then I'll just find those recommended reading lists for the parents that have asked.
So the first one, pages run errands for senators, is obviously a fact because it says in the text, for example, pages run errands and deliver messages. So that's a fact. Pages are interested in government. So pages are chosen by the senators of their home states. They must be 16 years old, have good grades, and show leadership qualities. So I think we can infer from that they must have some sort of inference. It's not a fact. We're not told that. So I think that would be an inference question. Pages go to school, definitely a fact, because it says they must have good grades. So therefore, they're definitely going to school. And then finally, it is an honour to be a Senate page. I think that would be an inference because we're not actually told that it's an honour, it's suggested.
Thanks, Lou. Perfect. I'm just dropping into everyone now those recommended reading lists that we've got for the different year groups. I'm just dragging those in, so hopefully everyone's able to get those. Lou, thanks very much. I think, as I say, that one is fairly straightforward, really, in terms of facts or inference. The next one, however, maybe is a little bit more difficult to sort of very clearly define it, but we'd like you to have a go at it. This is all about it was a bit of a fad, really. Hopefully it still happens, all about walking buses, and students getting to school via this sort of walking bus with a sort of a driver at the front, and then someone following on behind, making sure that everyone gets to where they need to get to safely. But yeah, walking buses. So have a read of that, and then see if you can work out whether the statements underneath are fact or inference. And hopefully we don't fall out over the answers. Okay, everyone, let's have a quick look down through this. As I say, it would be nice to get some answers in the chat. So should we start with the first one? Walking school buses provide good exercise. Do you think that is a fact, or do you think that is inference? Have a go at putting your answer in the chat. Just put fact, or if you just want to put infer. Let's see what you think. Inference, okay. Guys, brilliant. Everyone at the moment believes that it's inference, and I would agree with you, because it certainly obviously depends on the distance, doesn't it, from the school, but you can only really infer that. It's not definitely factual that a walking school bus provides good exercise. We would assume it probably would do, because you're walking, and anything where you're walking is good exercise for you. But I think you're right. I would be tempted to go for inference. Would you agree with that, Lou?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones you can only really infer.
Yeah, it's borderline, but
it is borderline, but yeah,
it doesn't actually state it.
No. Two adults usually accompany a large group. And like Lou says, if it states something, then you probably know that's going to be very factual. And so that would be, I would suggest, a fact. Thank you very much. Excellent. Thanks for getting involved in that one. What about the next one? Slow walkers could cause problems for a group. Do you think that's fact, or do you think that's inference? Again, there's very little mention of that within the passage. Where are you drawn on that one, Louise?
I would say that was inference.
Yeah, I would be going with inference as well. Let's just see what everyone thinks in the chat. Yeah. We've got a lot of inference going on there, so I think we'll go with you on that one. And again, if it's not really mentioned within the text as well, then you really do need to infer. And that's why children sometimes get a little bit confused with inference and fact, where they don't stick to what it says in the passage. So can't really sort of rely on what they think. They've got to go with the clues within the passage. And the last one, walking buses aren't much fun in bad weather. I think that one sometimes, Lou, is dependent on whether you like walking in the rain or not.
Exactly. That one is the tricky one.
It is, yeah. And the last one
I
is
think you wouldn't
too.
get,
yeah.
You wouldn't
agree,
really get a question like that in the 11 plus. It should be pretty clear.
Exactly. And that again, I think is something that's very important to reinforce here, is that in the exam it will be very clear cut. I think what we're trying to get across to you though is that inference and fact, sometimes the lines can be a little bit blurry. Should we move on, Lou, to the next part of our parent workshop, which is to look at a lovely example of a passage from Tom Sawyer. And I know we often use this one every year, don't we, as the one to look at. And I think because it is quite rich in vocabulary. I'll just admit someone else into the call. I think we thought we would probably read this one, Lou, wouldn't we?
Yes.
I don't know how you'd like to look at the questions. We've obviously got those sort of highlighted within the passage where the answers come from. Would you like to read it, and then maybe people can have a go at each individual question one at a time?
Yes, let's do that.
Let's do that.
I think before I start reading, I will just draw your attention to the fact that there is a little bit at the beginning in slightly bolder writing, which is an introduction. You'd be amazed at how many children, when that happens, miss it out. So being very mean, if I'm setting a comprehension, I often set a question from the introduction to catch out the ones who don't read it. So you read every bit of it. So The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Mark Twain. Tom lives with his younger brother, Sid, at their Aunt Polly's house. He has arranged a meeting with his friend Huckleberry Finn in the graveyard in the middle of the night. At 9:30 that night, Tom and Sid were sent to bed as usual. They said their prayers, and Sid was soon asleep. When it seemed to him that it must be nearly daylight, he heard the clock strike 10. This was despair. He would have tossed and fidgeted as his nerves demanded, but he was afraid he might wake Sid. So he lay still and stared up into the dark. Everything was dismally still. By and by, out of the stillness, little scarcely perceptible noises began to emphasize themselves. The ticking of the clock began to bring itself into notice. Old beams began to crack mysteriously. The stairs creaked faintly. Evidently, spirits were abroad. A measured, muffled snore issued from Aunt Polly's chamber. And now the tiresome chirping of a cricket that no human ingenuity could locate began. Next, the ghastly ticking of a death watch in the wall at the bed's head made Tom shudder. It means that somebody's days were numbered. Then the howl from the howl of a far-off dog rose on the night air and was answered by a fainter howl from a remoter distance. Tom was in agony. At last he was satisfied that time had ceased and eternity had begun. He began to doze in spite of himself. The clock chimed 11, but he did not hear it. And then there came, mingling with his half-formed dreams, a most melancholy caterwauling. The raising of a neighbourhood window disturbed him. A cry of "Scat, you devil!" and the crash of an empty bottle against the back of his aunt's woodshed brought him wide awake. And a single minute later, he was dressed and out of the house and creeping along the roof of the L on all fours.
Fantastic, Lou. Thank you very much. Sorry, I was getting carried. I could listen to you read all day long. I was lovely. Thank you very much for reading that out.
Thank you. What I was trying to illustrate was the importance of expression, how the expression brings the text alive. And that is the pace I would expect them to read in their head. Mm-hmm. And of course, when we're reading in our head, we're able to go much faster because we don't have to form the words. So I really encourage the children to read at that pace, allowing them to think.
And back to the point that we were mentioning right at the beginning of this workshop about sort of words per minute. And there are various things online that you can sort of test your child's words per minute. And you certainly do want to be looking at sort of 150 to 200 words per minute in terms of how quickly they can read. But more importantly, as Louise keeps emphasizing throughout this afternoon, that it is all about what they comprehend. It's all very well reading at a good pace, but are they digesting what they're reading? So what we've got attached to this classical piece are some questions. You may like to have a go at these. You are more than welcome in the chat as well to put the letters that you think are the answers. And then what we're going to show you is where those answers appear within that passage. So we're going to sort of highlight all the different places they appear. So let's have a little look at these questions and see if you can work out the answers. So could you start with number 1, all of you, and then just type the letter that you think is the right answer in the chat feed. Excellent. Someone's come up with the answer very, very quickly. Won't say whether you're right or wrong yet, but give people a chance. I will sort of just flick back to the passage again, just to give you an opportunity just to go back. And obviously this would be something children, and sometimes what children will have to do is sort of flip through multiple pages, and that's obviously something they just need to have practice of. It will, you know, the exam comes in a booklet. It wouldn't be a separate sort of comprehension sheet. It is a case of flipping back through. Thank you very much for those ones that have had a go at that first one, and lots of people have gone with B. Louise, he was afraid of waking Sid, so obviously that is correct. And if we just go and have a little look here, it says he was afraid he might wake Sid. So written slightly differently, but well done to you if you got that one correct. And number 2, would you like to have a go at number 2 for us? A word related one. And I think in this kind of question, it would usually have a line number. I know it doesn't in this instance, but it would usually have a line number, so the child could go and find that word. Again, in the chat, guys, have a go. See if you can tell us which one you think it is. Words here are quite close, actually, Louise, aren't they?
They are. And I think this is a lovely example that we can use to show the importance of checking, how you can check. If children have time, they can check their answer by slotting the word in. Yeah.
On this one, we've got lots of different answers. So some people have gone with C and some people have gone with E. So again, if we go back to the passage again, so there it is. Okay. And I think, again, just reading it within the context of the sentence. So by and by, out of the stillness, like scarcely perceptible noises began to emphasize themselves. If you can get the word and replace it with that word. So let's go back to the questions again. So we've got the answer as C.
Because it's noises, so observable wouldn't work because you don't observe a noise in that sense.
So if you think you would obviously, with observing, you're kind of looking, but with the recognizable, you're going to hear the sound.
But I think, you know, when a child has finished there and they've got time left and you say check, we ask them to put a little star against one that they're not sure of. And if the child wasn't sure there, in the checking, they might be able to go back and slot each of those words into the position and see which one works best.
Exactly.
So it's a good example of how to check.
Thanks, Lou. Number 3. Would you like to have a go at that one for us? Thank you for those ones that have got their answers flying through. And on this one, Louise, from what I can see from the chat, everyone is in agreement that they're going to go with A and say that it's small sounds made him think of ghosts.
Nice eliminations there.
Yeah, exactly. Again, if we just go back, let's see if we've got it as a yeah, so we've got the ticking of the clock began to bring itself into notice. Old beams began to crack mysteriously. The stairs creaked faintly. Evidently, spirits were abroad. There we go.
I think I actually really emphasized that when I read it. I stopped at each one so that you could. I always tell the children to imagine when you're in a text like this, a fiction text, imagine you're seeing it as a film. So you're reacting to it like you'd react to a film, and that will help you remember things and to infer.
Thanks, Lou. Another couple of questions, guys, for you to have a go at here. Number 4. See if you can work that one out for us. I'll go back to the passage again. This is one of those ones where you may not remember, so you might need to just go back and do a little bit of a quick check. Okay, Lou, the consensus within here is that
Yes, it's a
everyone
lovely
thinks,
inference.
yeah, everyone thinks
Lovely inference question, because the text says at 11 the clock struck and he did not hear it.
yes, yeah. So if we go back, it is E. Tom
Yes.
was sleeping lightly. So well done to those ones of you that went with E. And again, just to highlight here again where they would need to find it. Here we go. He began to doze in spite of himself. The clock chimed 11, but he did hear it. Let's go to the next one, which is number 5. In the passage, muffled means, and again, it would be important that the child goes back and finds that within the passage.
A measured, muffled snore issued from Aunt Polly's chamber.
Well done, Lou. Yeah.
I think they just need to know the meaning of muffled there.
Yeah, and that one, it's just a case of knowing that it's...
And if they don't know the other words, like mundane and muted, they really have got a difficult job there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite a tricky one, that one. In actual fact, I think we've got slightly different within our booklet. We might have ended up changing that. So sorry if that's caused a bit of confusion there.
But it's a good example of, you know, if you don't know the vocabulary, sometimes there really is very little you can do but guess.
Yeah. And again, one of the tricks that often examiners will play is that kind of opposite in meaning, Lou, isn't it, as well,
yes.
rather than synonyms. So the word amplified in there.
Yeah.
Number 6, would you like to have a go at that one? The person who cried, "Scat, you devil," was number 6. Yeah, oh, we're very quickly coming through with the answers on this one. Well done, everyone. Very good. And yes, of course, it was a neighbour. Well done. And again, here are neighbouring window. So again, just reading it really thoroughly and interpreting what's going on. But that one certainly didn't catch you out. So well done, everyone. Just 2, I think just 2 more. Yeah, 2 more to let you have a go at. Number 7 and number 8. Thank you for participating so fully in this little comprehension activity. Just while you are having a go at 7, 8, I will just mention that the CGP comprehension books are absolutely fantastic in terms of very short extracts, but just the level of questions in there are brilliant. So we do use, as you know, a variety of different books throughout our Teacher Right courses, but we certainly do trust very much in the CGP material. Very reputable, but the questions are just absolutely spot on in terms of what children need to be working on. You know, the questions are certainly not too easy at all. Okay, everyone, thank you for going for number 7. And we have got D. Well done. Another dog's distant response was the other howl that we heard. answered by a fainter howl from a remoter distance is where the clue for that one would come in. So well done to the ones of you that went for D. And then we've got a little bit carried away with D there. Someone's gone with D lots of times, but you're absolutely right, because D is the answer to number 8 as well. So well done if you put D on number 8.
That's a good example of where I say to the children, sometimes they put a word in just to frighten them. That word ingenuity, they've chosen that sentence with the word ingenuity, I think, hoping that they would see that word and panic.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Because when you look at it, many of those answers you can eliminate.
Thanks, Lou. I think it's a really good example, guys. And just to show you this, and I've sort of flicked to this slide a few times again, just the spread of where that evidence comes from within the passage. But again, if your child is not reading any classical books, do maybe start to introduce them to them. There are some sort of lovely versions on the market which do sort of dumb down the language a little bit just to make it more accessible for children. So yeah, do have a look at those. Right, I think, Lou, we're going to move on now to do our little bit of acting that we sometimes do in these workshops, because we've got some sort of commonly asked questions that we've heard children ask, we've heard parents ask, and we thought we would just run down through some of those with you. So I'll read out the question if you like, Lou, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And then Louise will give us her response. But these are very typical of what we hear children say. There are words in the passage I don't understand.
And it's most likely that there will be. Sometimes they're asked to explain the meaning of words, but these words are part of a longer piece of writing. So a text around an unfamiliar word may give you clues. And I always say to them, find the word and read before the word and read after the word. Read the whole sentence and that will give you a clue. The word itself might contain clues. In other words, the root word might be another word that you know. Or a prefix or suffix might give you an opposite or an understanding of what the word is trying to say. So don't panic, think. I always say to children that the best weapon that the examiners have in the 11 plus is panic. They have a room full of clever children and they have to choose some clever children from a room full of clever children. And if they can make a child panic, that eliminates one. And so just keep your cool and think about the word, eliminate ones that sound as if they're not going to work, and just do your best, ultimately your best guess. But don't rule out thinking, because if you panic, you won't think.
I don't have any idea what one part of the passage means.
So we always say you only have time to read a passage once, but you do have time to read a sentence or a few sentences twice. So if you realize you're losing track of the text, read that little bit where you're losing track of the text again. So always have a go, even if you're not sure, read that paragraph several times, spot the keywords and ideas, and try to imagine or get the gist of what is going on. It's much better to guess and put something on your paper rather than leave a blank.
Thanks, Louise. Next question, we'll just go on to our next slide. I can't find the answer to the question anywhere.
Again, it may well be an inference question where you've got to read between the lines. And you've got to form your own opinion from the clues in the text. Scanning won't help you there. You can only scan to find the place where it's inferred. And that's why that first reading is so important, because you will be inferring as you're reading.
How am I expected to remember the whole passage?
And the answer to that is you're not. I did talk earlier on about what I call mapping the test. Comprehension isn't a memory test, but if you can remember roughly where things happen, then you can go and skim or scan in the right place rather than it skimming and scanning the whole text every time. So even if the questions are on a different page or a different sheet, you must always use the text to help you find the answer, even if you can think you can remember it. So more commonly, it's not that children can't find it, but they presume that they've remembered it and don't try to find it. It's really important to try and find, especially in your checking. If you've answered a question, you think, I know that, I'm certain I know it, I'm not going to go back and check because I'm certain I know it, and you mark it. If you have checking time, go back to that question and find your evidence.
Thank you, Louise. Just moving on to our next slide. One of the things that we really wanted to emphasize in this workshop was to really try and encourage the love of reading. We try and do everything we can at Teach It Right to, I suppose, inspire children to read, to widen their vocabulary, and hopefully enjoy the process. And one of the things I will mention that your child may well be part of is Louise's book club on a Sunday, and we've been doing it now for a long time, really very much since the start of this academic year. Louise, on a Sunday afternoon, has a group of children. It tends to be the same children that come every week, which is lovely, and they share their own books with Louise, but Louise also introduces new books to them that they may well want to go away. And I know we were talking before we came live, Louise, about your hunts in charity shops for
my penchant for a charity shop.
Yes, and you're certainly a master at finding really, really good books that the children may potentially like to go away and read, and that really is from both non-fiction to fictional and poetry books as well. So if it is something that you would like your child to participate in on a Sunday afternoon, Louise is always there from 2:30 to run that book club. But there are obviously lots of other ways that you can inspire your child to read. Joining a library. You may well be a member of a library already, but that's a great way for children to sort of swap and borrow books and enjoy, getting to the end of stories and then thinking next week I can choose a different book. One of the things that we know is a very common thing to do with families is for you to read to your child before they go to bed. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, the older children sometimes that gets sort of lost a little bit. But I have a child in year 5. I have a child in year 2. I also have a very young child, but we certainly do make sure that every night a book is read. And it's lovely to be able to talk about the stories. My child in year 2 actually has had challenges over March to do something different every day with their reading book. So, for example, I think last night she had to read while trying to sing some of the words. Another one was her being upside down and reading. Another one was balancing something on her head while she was reading, and lots of fun things that just make that reading process enjoyable. But if they know that you're showing interest in their books, they will really, really enjoy that. And I'm sure if you make reading something that is fun, and I know during lockdowns we often had a period of time where we would sit down as a family and try and all read. Unfortunately, it didn't always last particularly long, but at least it was something that they could see that we enjoy reading just as much as them.
And I just add there that two things. Firstly, I read to my daughter when she was 15. I read her Thomas Hardy, because it helps them to get into a book that they may not feel confident to tackle themselves. I've forgotten what the other thing I was going to say.
I don't know about audios, Lou, as well. I know that's something that I've found very useful with my own children to get them into books.
Yes.
Listening to audios in the car,
especially with the second child.
Yes, and I think there are so many good ways of getting children hooked on a book that they want to then read further.
Audio books, tremendous.
And sometimes, and I know this is a conversation I've had with so many parents over the years about, and I have to say this, unfortunately, not to be too general, but generally about boys not wanting to read, is to say, well, as long as they are reading something. And if you can get them into certain magazines or newspapers, I know with the First News, for example, which is a wonderful children's newspaper, great. If they are reading, then you're doing the right thing. But the problem comes when they're not reading at all, and it is about trying to find those hooks and trying to get them engaged in books. This is a list which is in your...
Sorry, Chris, again
Sorry,
interrupting. The
that's all
one
right.
thing I would say that has really surprised me and delighted me in book club is that I initially thought we would be having conversations about books, but what it's more turned into is every single child to almost wants to read aloud. That's why they're coming on. They want to read to me and to their peers, and it's just delightful hearing them. So
I think you were also saying, Louise, earlier about how much they've improved as well.
Yes.
You've seen their improvement with their reading, and
Yes.
I'm sure that's not often down to the book club, I'm sure, in so many ways, but also probably the fact that now that they're very inspired to reading more and reading more frequently, and that can only be beneficial. Guys, we won't necessarily go down through the entire list there. You've got this in your pack. I'm sure will know most of these things anyway, but sometimes it can just be a little spark. You think, oh yeah, I haven't tried that, and that could be a good way of encouraging reading. But we've also got, and I will just mention, a radical reading competition going on at the moment, which Louise has actually entered already, I have to say. But we are very keen to get pictures of children reading in wacky places and send them through. There's a lovely opportunity to win some books on that competition. So if your child hasn't entered yet, get them reading. My child was trying to think he would get into the washing machine the other day and we take a picture of him reading. That didn't quite come to plan, actually. But I'm sure your child can come up with some great places to read. Take a picture. If you're happy for us to share it on a Tuesday, let us know within that email. And we can get some nice pictures of children reading in strange places. Right, I think we'll move on now, because I'm conscious we've only got half an hour left. And one of the things we did want to cover off within this workshop was to talk to you about spelling, punctuation and grammar. Now, this is very relevant to GL assessment, but I have to say there are elements certainly within the grammar sections which are also very relevant for closed passages for CEM. So please don't run off if your child is just focusing on CEM. This hopefully will have relevance to them. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about sort of the types of questions that children get under SPAG. But a lot of these things that we're discussing are across the exam board. So it's not just relevant to one. So let's first of all talk to you about spelling and really outline, first of all, how it's presented in the 11+ exams for GL assessment. Children are given a sentence and they have to find within that sentence a word that is spelled incorrectly, or possibly not. That if they go for N, and you can see N at the end of all of these sentences here, that indicates that there is no spelling mistake at all. That's often one of the hardest options for children to go for, because they just believe, well, there has to be a mistake here and I just can't find it. But they obviously need to trust in their knowledge. If they don't think there's a spelling mistake, then they choose N. But where, if they do find a spelling error, they indicate with the letter that falls underneath that word which word is spelled incorrectly. So in the example here, we've got the word favorite, obviously missed out the U. So they would be selecting A because favorite appears within that section. Now, one of the things I know is really important with this, if children are going to be able to spot spelling mistakes, they have to know how that word is spelt. Now, at Teach It Right, at the beginning of every lesson, we do a spelling test. And I've heard Louise so many times talk about spelling strategies with her students. I know all our tutors do it, talk about different ways of learning words, the best way of learning words, talking about things like phonological awareness, but also all the little tricks and hints that can help them learn those words. So I think hopefully I've sort of set you up, Lou, just to talk a little bit about some of the spelling strategies that I know you do with your pupils, but really how important this spelling section is in the 11+.
it's really important, because if a child's a good speller, they can whiz through it actually quite quickly, and that saves them time to work on some of the more challenging aspects. I've seen children do some of these really quickly. What I always say to children is, because it works for, it's a generally good rule anyway, but because of the way it's tested in the 11+, what they must do when they're learning spellings is give words attention. If you're meeting someone new and you've got to remember their name, you look at their face, you look at their features, and you try to just give them some attention. Words are the same. If you give them some attention and notice things about them, your brain actually almost takes a photograph while you're looking at it. It takes a photograph of the shape, it takes a photograph of the length, and children will notice this. They'll say, you know, even you've had that experience of saying, I don't know what's wrong with it, but I just know it's just wrong. That's because you've given a word attention. So if you look at the first one, the example where the answer's favourite, I would teach the children to notice that the word our, O-U-R, is hiding in that word. And I say that's what I call a shy word. So that's one strategy of looking for shy words hiding within a word. If you look at the second one, it's incredible, not incredible. So another strategy I teach them is to say words differently when you're considering the spelling. So obviously when I'm reading that sentence, I'll say incredible. But if I'm writing it, I will say incredible. So I will notice that that word is an ibble word, and I say it's incredible. And just get that into my head that it's an ibble word. The next one, in sensations, I would notice that when I'm learning sensations, that the word sat is hiding. Now, if they know that the word sat is a shy word hiding in sensations, then they're going to notice straight away that the way it's spelt in that text is wrong. So there are lots of different strategies, and the more strategies you use, the better speller you will be. For another one, for example, is a word that has a double letter in. I will sound that letter twice. So according has got 2 C's. So I teach them to say ac-cord-ing. So they sound the C at the end of ac and the C at the beginning of core, and then they will know it's a double letter. So there's 3 strategies straight away. There are many more, but the more strategies you can use, the better.
Louise, thank you very much. Can I, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
I was just going to put into the chat a commonly misspelt word list, which we have put in the Tuesday emails, but if it is one that people would like to have, I will just put it straight into the chat, because what we tend to find, Lou, don't we, that these words that you know, are commonly misspelt are the ones that come up pretty much every year. You know, your necessary, your guarantee, those words that often children do find more difficult. So,
and there's those 2 words, guarantee. I would teach them to say go guarantee. I also noticed that children think once they've left infant school that they don't need their phonics anymore. I really encourage them to use their phonics. So to remember that something like oi in a word is oi, because it's the oi that makes the oi sound, because they forget their phonics. And I notice that when they're reading out loud, when they're having to decode a word, they don't use their phonics. So it's really important to bring their attention to the importance of phonics when you're reading.
Lou, thanks very much. While you've been talking and giving lots of tips and hints here about spelling, we've had a few questions that have come up in the chat, and I'd like to try and answer them if we can. So one of the questions was, what good poetry or poem books could you recommend? One of the books that I have used, I've certainly used it when I was teaching, was a book called The Works, which had a whole anthology of poems, which was great. And I also remember there was another book, and I'm sorry I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but it used to have a different poem every day, and we used to start the day with that poem, and that was great fun. Are there any that spring in your mind around poetry that you would suggest?
I could take some pictures of some photographs some anthologies and send that. We could send those out. I haven't got them
that would be great.
But anthologies are the way to go.
I think they are.
I actually did poetry today, and I asked the children, do you like this poem best or that poem best? And they were happy to give their opinions. What I said to them is, poetry is like music. Don't listen to a poem and not like it, and therefore decide that you don't like poetry. If you heard a piece of music and you didn't like that piece of music, you wouldn't say, I don't like that piece of music, therefore I don't like music at all. But that's what children often do. So they need exposure. A poem a day is a wonderful sharing. And I've had parents come back and say that that's really helped to share the poem together and discuss whether you like it or not.
And it's often about that, Lou, isn't it? When you're reading poems, it's about what you feel, or some poems we'll like, other poems we may not, but it's how you can connect to those poems. I think it's really important. But having those discussions,
one of the best gifts that you can give to a child is the love of poetry, because it takes you throughout life.
Absolutely, yeah. One other question that's come through: any magazines that we could recommend?
Ooh.
I do know. I'm just thinking of magazines that my child has read. We've actually signed up to the RSPBC, is it, the Royal Society for the Birds, and we do get a nature one that comes through every week, which I know my son enjoys reading, but he's into birds. But I
think I'm not very good on magazines, but going back to non-fiction, and just once again saying, with a non-fiction, again, I teach the children that the lovely thing about non-fiction is you can dip into it in the way that you can dip into a magazine. You can dip into it. And again, I go to charity shops and I pick up wonderful non-fiction books for £1. Really lovely books. You don't have to spend a lot to for £1 you can't buy a magazine. I was shocked at the price of a comic for my granddaughter. So try having a look in those areas.
I mean, obviously the National Geographic is something that I know a lot of kids sort of sign up to monthly. Again, there are different options out there. One of the things that has been shared in the chat, Mr. Young, are you able just to tell us a little bit more about this magazine?
Yeah, sure.
Hi.
It's it's aimed at this sort of age group, probably between about 8 to 12.
Yes,
I'd say, and it covers a mixture of topics ranging from sort of current affairs to anything from geography and environment to robots. They have a theme every month, and all the articles are written about that theme. And it's full of activities and articles, and it links to stuff online as well. I think it seems to be aimed at inquisitive children.
Fantastic.
That's
great.
Wonderful.
That sounds great. Thank you very much for putting the link in the chat as well. And that may well be, guys, something that you want to refer to and have a look at. And thank you very much for that suggestion. And that's what it's all about sometimes, isn't it? If you've used something with your own child and it works, and just trying to see other ways that we can engage our students with reading processing. Thank you very much for that. I hope that has kind of answered your questions. As we sort of go along, if there are any other things that you've used with your children that have worked really, really well, please don't hesitate to either unmute yourself, tell us about it, or if you don't want to do that, just put it in the chat. That would be amazing. We will move on now to the sort of second part of this, or out of the three, and that is to talk to you about punctuation. So this is laid out in a very similar way to the spelling section in GL. So the children are given a sentence. They have to find a punctuation error or an omission of punctuation. There may not be any punctuation mistakes at all. And if so, like with the spelling, they would go with N. One of the things that Louise does within her lessons, and I know a lot of the tutors choose to do this, is to actually sort of go through each punctuation mark and actually talk to them about the function of that specific punctuation mark. Because again, it's one of those things similar to spelling. If a child doesn't understand where those punctuation marks and how they're actually used, and particularly when you get around to things like parenthesis and things like that. A couple of years ago, Louise and her colleague Hilary Mail actually did a punctuations session with all the tutors and all our staff, and it was absolutely fascinating just how sometimes how ambiguous it can be, Lou, I guess is the best way of summarizing it. But I think what we wanted to try and do for our own pupils was make sure that they're very clear about when to use pieces of punctuation, when to not, which will hopefully help them identify those punctuation marks.
Yes, and also I teach them that checking list, an order in which to check these sentences, going from the easiest punctuation to the most difficult. And I think many of the children are often very surprised when I say that the punctuation mark at the end of the list is the comma. It's the most difficult one because there are so many ways in which we use a comma. In the 11 plus, I think there's about 8 or 9 ways that they check. So I always advise them to leave the comma till the last, because what children do is when they can't find a mistake, they decide a place where they might just stick a comma, but they don't know why they've stuck it in.
Mike, you've got your, sorry, Lou, you've got your hand up.
Why,
oh, sorry, hi, Mum, sorry, it's not Mike, obviously, so, hi.
For the question 2, why is it D? I thought it was C because the exclamation mark is before said. No, I mean the speech marks are meant to be before said.
Just looking at it now.
No, what's actually said, the time traveller actually says the words, the peculiar sensations of time travel are excessively unpleasant. Those are the words that the time traveller says. So it needs speech marks. It's got the opening speech marks, but not the closing speech marks.
Yeah, but I think the closing speech marks are meant to be after the comma and before said. But
yeah, I see what you mean. It does. It's sort of the line doesn't really help you much there, does it? I think really, I'm sorry, it may be the way I've copied it and stretched it. I think really the line possibly should go there. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
To make sure that it actually goes into D. Well spotted. And I would agree with you. I think when I copied these, I may have sort of stretched it a little bit too much. So thank you for spotting that. And you're absolutely right. We would want the speech marks to go around unpleasant, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
Lou, did you want to give us that list of punctuation marks in terms of the order that you go through?
Yes, if you just write it up.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
First is a capital letter. So I put A for, first of all, you check, is it a capital letter mistake? I always say to them, you know where capital letters, the one they often miss is seasons. Seasons don't have capital letters and they think they do. They don't. Unless,
of course, it's the name of somewhere. So it's like, I don't know, the Summer Park in Canada or something, then you would. But you're absolutely right. That's one that they often get caught out with.
So capital letters, full stops, exclamation marks and question marks. What they do with question marks is they often put one in for reported speech or something, and that confuses them. The next one is speech marks. They often give the closing speech marks, not the opening ones. The next one is apostrophes. Apostrophes for contractions and apostrophes for plurals.
Possession,
possession, sorry. Possession.
Yeah.
Okay, then brackets used for parenthesis, also dashes used for parenthesis, 2 dashes, and also 2 commas used for parenthesis. So although the comma appears there, it's only appearing there for parenthesis. What have I missed out?
We've obviously got the hyphen, Lou, haven't we?
The hyphen
Yeah.
and the hyphen and the dash, a single dash to add on a clause.
Yeah.
Okay, and then it's colon, semicolon, and comma.
Fantastic. Yeah. Now, if you are looking for something to support your child, I mean, obviously in the lessons, we will talk a lot about these punctuation marks and we'll explain how they're used. But one of the things that we often get parents to look at with their children is the BBC website, because the BBC website has some wonderful short videos which explain about, all in a funny way, in a comical way, how these punctuation marks are used, and it is brilliant. So I have just put it here. It's under the bite size section within the BBC website, and it really is great to support punctuation knowledge. So if it's something your child has not explored before, they often do within their own school, but if not, do have a look at that, because it's a really great way of identifying punctuation that your child may need a little bit of support with. Oh, an ellipse someone has put in the
I
in
was
the
just
chat.
replying
Yes,
to that.
yes,
I've never
absolutely.
seen them. I've
No,
never seen them
I
test
haven't
for
either.
ellipsis.
But
If they did, it should be 3, only 3. but-
exactly, yeah, I've done my 3 dots there. So again, thank you for mentioning that. Another bit of punctuation that, yeah, is part of our list, I suppose, but we haven't seen it within the 11 plus, but still one that we should mention. Right, the third section of the GL Assessment 11 plus exam, and I did mention earlier, this does cross over with CEM as well, because this is very similar to the multiple choice option as part of a closed test. So this is where children have to find a word that will complete a sentence or a clause, or that they need to ensure that the word that they go with makes that sentence make grammatical sense. And there's lots of different tricks here that they will play. And perhaps Louise will outline some of the rules that they need to be aware of in a moment. Generally, they have 5 words as their answer options. It could be 4. I have seen 4 in some books, but I think generally they will give them 5. And of course, it's very important that the letter that they've selected within the sentence is then demarcated onto a separate multiple choice sheet. If you are wondering about how many questions they would get in these sections, it's usually around 7 that they would get. So 7 spelling, 7 grammar, 7 punctuation. Not really any more than that. So again, it just sort of gives you an idea of roughly how many they're going to get. Lou, grammar sections.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions on tense. The
Yes.
tenses in the sentence have to agree. So that's a very popular one. Another one is irregular verbs, putting in funny choices and where an irregular verb is concerned. So knowing what the irregular verb is. Other ones you can see here to do with the verb to be, which is a very irregular verb and the verb we use most in our language. So they often put one of those in. A lot of it is about knowing the type of word that can fit in a sentence. So, you know, having a word that a position that's clearly got to be a preposition, and then putting a word that's as a choice that's not a preposition. So it's about knowledge of understanding how words fit together. That's tested.
Thanks, Lou. So again, this is something that we practice a lot within our lessons in terms of different exercises around this. When we get into block 5 and 6, as I did mention earlier, we do start to do more time sections around this. And what they will do with the spelling, punctuation, and grammar sections is they will kind of bolt them onto the end of the comprehension. So that becomes part of the English section within the GL test. Sometimes we've seen it, and actually Louise has written a lot of questions around this, where the spelling, punctuation, and grammar, the sentences are directly connected with the passage that they've previously had. So that's something else that may well be may well be seen by our students. But again, these all are about practice, and I'm sorry to emphasize the obvious, but the more the children do of these, the better they get, because they start to see very common themes, like Louise was saying there about sort of particular verbs or particular tenses, that they start to recognize the kind of tricks that some of the question writers are trying to use.
One of the biggest problems is that the word that you choose often depends on words that come after the word that you're choosing, and children don't realize that. They don't read the whole sentence before they choose the word.
Exactly,
So
Lou, yeah, and
problem.
sort of rereading it again to make sure that it works within that sentence.
And
not being
sometimes
too quick to
they choose to examine on anomalies in our language, sort of phrases that you just have to know.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
those are very difficult for children. If they don't know them, they don't know them.
Just a website there, which again is in your booklet, you might like to have a look at. Very good for helping children categorize word groups. And again, we think that is a really big part of doing well with the grammar section. The poem is there again, and that is in your booklet. I did say at the beginning, if anyone hasn't had the booklet emailed to them, please do get in contact with us and we will send it out to you. Louise, thank you very, very much. We did have a sort of a third part of this workshop, which was to talk about writing, but we've already had you here for 2 hours already. I think the best plan of action, if Louise is up for this, I think we will add in a writing workshop later on, maybe in block 5 or 6, if that's okay with everybody. We would like to talk to you a little bit about writing and the things we want our students to be aware of. But I think in terms of what we've thrown at you this afternoon with comprehension and SPAG, we will certainly draw this to a conclusion. I did just want to share with you just very, very quickly, just a couple of reading resources, which are absolutely wonderful. We have these in stock. We use these in our lessons, but some really nice question cubes, which you kind of roll after you've read something, and it'll get them to think about predicting and what they've learned from reading, and it just makes that reading process far more fun. We also use a set of comprehension cards, and we use those a lot in our revision camps and during our weekly lessons, and they're really, really good. Unfortunately, they are not available to purchase anymore. They don't print them anymore, but we were wise enough really to buy a lot of those in. So we do use those reading comprehension cards in our lessons. They have a little short extract with a series of multiple choice questions on the back, which is why we really warm to them a lot. I will just mention Mrs. Wordsmith is a really good way to build up vocabulary. I have mentioned it within our resource feature of the week on a Tuesday, but just in case you weren't aware of it, it's a really good way of children building up their vocabulary in a very comical way. So if it's something you haven't seen before, Mrs. Wordsmith, again, you can just find that in Google. And I think that brings us to a conclusion. Louise, can I thank you again for doing these? Louise has just been on holiday and only came back on Friday. So to not only teach all day and then come along and join me for a workshop is very impressive, Lou. I wonder whether bedtime will be 7 o'clock for you tonight.
It was 9 o'clock last night.
Yeah, but thank you very much, and thank you for all you do with our students. I know if your child is fortunate to have Louise as their tutor, you're very lucky, because she's incredibly knowledgeable, but also incredibly enthusiastic about helping children with their English skills. Parents, can I thank you for coming along as well and engaging with us so much this afternoon. I hope you found it beneficial. I will just stop the share for the moment and just double check that there's no more questions in the chat. But thank you for all of the things that you have put in there. A couple of people saying that the Tom Sawyer's was something that they read in year 7 when they were at school, and I'm afraid that tends to be the case, that some of the passages that children are exposed to in the 11+, as you can tell, are slightly beyond their years, but that is one way that they do. But thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I'm sorry I can't see all your faces, but I know you're there, and I know you were engaging with us this afternoon. Do come along to our next one. As I say, I would like to do one on writing. and writing skills. And we do have one that is very popular, which is on exam technique. And that is sort of our last workshop of the academic year. And we invite back our students from last year. They talk to you about all the things that they, or their words of wisdom about the exams and how they prepared, particularly over the summer. I will just mention as well that our mock exams and our revision camp dates are all out there now. So I hope you've had an opportunity to have a look at those and maybe book your child on some of those different events. Thank you again, Louise, very much indeed. And
Welcome.
goodbye, everyone. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.